In September 1971, Lloyd's Bank in Baker Street, London, became the scene of one of the most death-defying robberies of all time.
This exposed a vulnerability which sent a shudder through the banking world. This particular kind of offence takes major planning. It takes a certain amount of criminal audacity. I mean, explosives, thermic plants, these are serious endeavours.
Whilst a fearless gang were going to incredible lengths to reach their loot, they didn't realise they were broadcasting the robbery.
I heard somebody say, "We've got 400,000 and we'll let you know when we're coming out."
It was very unusual, the police listening into the broadcasts and trying to track the robbers down.
What followed was an extraordinary game of cat and mouse that shook the very foundations of the country's establishment, making this one of Britain's biggest heists. Saturday evening in the affluent area of Wimpole Street, central London, Robert Rowlands, a radio enthusiast, was retiring for the night.
I thought I'd go to bed early, read a book, maybe listen to the radio, and so I turned it on, and it happened to be on the Citizens Band frequency, which is the walkie-talkie frequency. The trend for CB radio, it's that Citizens Band radio where you can talk to one another, was all the rage in America, and it was coming to Great Britain, but the government still said it was illegal. And so people were doing it illegally, and I used to sometimes listen to the broadcasts on my specialised radio. And while it was warming up, I didn't change the frequency because I was going to listen to Radio Luxembourg.
But Radio Luxembourg never kicked into the airwaves. Instead, Rowlands tuned into something completely unexpected.
And I heard two people talking on walkie-talkies. And I thought, that's very strange. And when I heard them say they'd got about 400,000 and they'd let them know when they were coming out, I knew that it was quite serious.
In the dead of night, Robert Rowlands feared he may have stumbled upon a robbery in progress.
There were two voices. One was inside the premises, and the other voice, it sounded as though it was outside because it was a much clearer signal. So I assumed there was a lookout. I thought it might be the tobacconist shop just round the corner. These two were talking together and discussing what they were going to do. And when they said they got 400,000, I naturally assumed it was cigarettes.
Concerned that he had somehow managed to tune into a frequency being used by thieves, Rowlands knew he had to inform the authorities.
It was quite an exciting moment because one doesn't hear that sort of thing every day. I realised it was a serious situation, and I felt, as I knew the person that worked in the tobacconist just round the corner, I thought at least it was my duty perhaps to prevent the thing going any further. So I decided to ring the local police station. And the duty officer answered the phone, and I said to him, "I'm listening to the radio, and I think there's a robbery going on." He said, "Oh, that's very no good, sir. If you hear any more funny broadcasts, why don't you record them?"
Okay.
As it was a Saturday night and just after 11 o'clock, he presumed that perhaps I was a hoaxer. I was not surprised because I expected him to not believe what I was saying to him because it was so unusual. In fact, I was rather grateful to him because his suggestion was a good one. So we ended the conversation, and I got my little cassette recorder out, and I recorded the conversations for the next 2 hours.
Although the officer hadn't taken him seriously, on his advice, Rowlands rushed to gather any potential evidence.
I got my little cassette recorder, and I held it by the radio, got back into bed, and every time they spoke, I pressed the record button.
Get some sleep and come here with both radios at 8 o'clock in the morning. Over.
What followed was an extraordinary, heated conversation between members of the gang.
That's a bit ridiculous, mate. I'll never wake up like that. Over. What time do you think you'll wake up? Over. Well, I might just well come out and come back in tomorrow, mightn't I? If you're going to do that.
With one man wanting to take a break, the other clearly had an issue with the decision.
I suggested we carry on working tonight, mate, and get it done with. Over.
But this was met with a firm response and revealed more about what was unfolding.
Look, the place is filled with fumes where we was, and if the security come in and smell the fumes, we're all going to take stoppo and none of us have got nothing. Whereas this way, we've all got 300 grand to cut up. And when we come back in tomorrow, security have doors it up for us, well, at least we've got something. Over.
Then there was the young voice, which sounded like a woman.
Hello, do you read me? Over. I read you loud and clear. Carry on.
I was getting quite tired at that point, but when they said that there were fumes where they were, I realised it was a bank robbery and they had to leave because they couldn't breathe.
Rowlands realized he was onto something major. With the discussion about security and fumes unfolding, he knew it was vital to gather more evidence. Despite one of the men's urgency to down tools, the other was defiant.
I always like organ stops, mate. I'm not going to be any good as mine anyway. I can hardly see now. If I don't do something. Over. Yeah, but you can go to sleep tonight. Over. How am I going to sleep tonight, mate? For a start off, I won't wake up. There's a certainty that. And I'm not going to sleep very well up here, am I? Over.
Despite a potential robbery in progress, the thieves were getting into an argument about what to do next.
There was all sorts of stupid, childish-like excuses, and the people in the bank got quite angry.
I won't be able to sleep anyway, because it's freezing cold and everything. Over. You do what you've got to do, bub. Please.
The lookout man didn't want them to leave the bank, but the man in the bank wanted to leave because they couldn't breathe. The fumes were so bad. In fact, a deep voice came onto the radio, and everybody stood to attention. The man on the roof immediately changed his attitude. It was obviously Mr. Big, the man in charge of the whole operation.
It was possible for us to work hard. We're always working on office working non-stop all day. If you put the earplugs in your ear, turn the radio on, wake you, it would be like an alarm call, won't it? Over.
And the man on the roof calmed down then.
I will stay here. I will stay awake. Will you try and get in a bit earlier? All right?
So they left the bank and he was left to sleep or not sleep.
The robbers had leaked vital clues, and with early conversations alluding to the theft of thousands of pounds, Rowlands was now in a race against time to warn the authorities.
It was about 1 o'clock when I phoned the police the second time. As I hadn't had much response from the local police, I phoned Scotland Yard. I told him that I knew there was a robbery going on and that I'd recorded it.
Hello, do you read me? Over.
An amateur radio enthusiast has tuned into a frequency being used by a gang of thieves. After hearing shocking conversations suggesting they have stolen thousands of pounds, he alerts the police for a second time in the hope of catching the criminals red-handed.
Mr. Rowlands was able to hold the signal with the equipment he had and listen to the various bursts of conversation which drew his attention to the fact that this could be not a joke or not somebody skylarking about, but actually a real crime being committed. That was the initial source of what swung into a massive operation.
The Metropolitan Police immediately dispatched officers to Wimpole Street.
I played some of the cassette and he was quite convinced then that this was a genuine situation.
We've all got 300 grand to cut up. And when we come back in tomorrow, security have doors it up for us, well, at least we've got something. Over.
Officers listened intently to Rowland's recordings, but nothing else was coming through the radio.
They sat there all night until the morning, At 8 o'clock, we listened to the radio. He was still on, and we were getting quite tired by that time. And at 8:30, it suddenly crackled into life.
How's everything? Okay.
And the lookout was thrilled because he'd been a bit agitated the night before, having to stay up on the roof overlooking the bank.
Everything's fine. No intruders whatsoever. Over.
And so the robbery then continued. Well, these policemen were absolutely fascinated.
After 7 hours' silence, the police had a unique dilemma ahead. A major robbery was taking place right before them, but they didn't know where it was. How do you catch a ruthless gang in action when your only clues are voices on a radio? As senior officers quickly scrambled to Rowlands, the gang continued, unbeknownst to them that Scotland Yard were listening in.
By the way, they're treading the road outside somewhere. Over. Okay.
But straight after this dialogue came a clue that the officers didn't want to hear.
They're in there now. Over. So pay absolute attention to that front door. Over.
By now, Rowlands had already heard them talk about thousands of pounds. As the daring gang gained entry once more, officers needed to find the location, and fast.
Initially, the police took action to try to identify where they could contact radio detection gear to carry out a sweep of the area. Of course, radio transmissions in those days were very difficult to locate. Buildings would absorb a signal, the signal itself could be distorted, and so there's no certainty as to which direction the signal was coming from.
Shortly after that, there was a bit of a drama because the restaurant next to the bank, one of the waiters must have heard all the noise because he went to the bank and he put his eyes against the window and tried to see what was happening.
Hold on. Over. Don't you hear it clear? The guy from next door has just gone and looked in our window. He's gone back to his doorway now. He's standing in his doorway, but he come and looked in our window. Over.
And then again he came and had another look. They had to stop work for a short time because the waiter could obviously hear a lot of noise going on.
Roger. What is he doing? So what, he's just standing there at the moment. Over. Hello. He's gone back in now. Over.
And these clues I would have thought would be vital in detecting which bank it was. But they seemed to think that there was a lot of drilling of the roads on Sunday mornings anyway, and they thought it wasn't important. But the waiter was important because not many restaurants would be open on a Sunday morning.
But as teams were scrambled to search for anything to identify their whereabouts, the one and only link to the unfolding drama fell silent.
The bank robbers were alerted by the fact that the waiter had looked through the window and were obviously getting a little bit nervous because they left the bank and they gave an indication to Bob on the roof that they were leaving by saying,
Would you like to change to the other channel? Over.
and after that there were no more broadcasts. So one can only assume that was the code for leaving the bank.
With nothing else to go on, Scotland Yard were on the back foot. Teams of officers were sent to scour the streets.
Okay, guys, come on, let's move it.
750 banks were checked within an 8-mile radius of central London. The actual bank staff, bank managers, bank security people had to be alerted to actually attend with the police and check premises because police don't have right of entry to these places.
With no further messages coming through, the officers could not establish if the thieves had changed frequency or had already looted one of the major banks in the capital and fled.
They sent squad cars to all the banks, which was complete madness, and I told them about 3 or 4 times, this robbery is not in Greater London, it's local, it's within 1 to 2 miles at the very, very most.
The task now facing Scotland Yard was colossal. An 8-mile radius of Wimpole Street covers 22 boroughs in the capital. With limited resources, Sunday trading hours and hundreds of premises to check, every officer went to work to desperately try and find the targeted bank.
The risk factor for the actual losses were increasing because the simple length of time that the criminal operation had been going on. Really, you're looking for a needle in a haystack. That's the reality of communications at that time.
By Sunday evening, more than a day since the first radio communication from the gang was detected, Scotland Yard was still combing the streets of London.
And an enormous police operation was going on, but going on fairly covertly in order not to disturb the criminals or to try to catch the criminals in the act of committing the crime.
In a race against time, more officers were drafted into the already extensive search. As the investigation grew, businesses in London opened as usual on the Monday morning.
Well, the bank manager, when he entered the premises and the vault was opened, there were over 260 vault boxes opened, strewn across the floor. To any bank manager, it must have been his worst nightmare.
Despite the extensive trawl, Scotland Yard had their worst fear finally confirmed.
Come on!
It was only on Monday morning when the banks opened that the report came in that it was the Lloyds Bank at Baker Street.
Lloyds, in the heart of London, had been part of the UK's financial empire for over 100 years, serving customers from its busy branch on the corner of a well-known high street. Their vault housed hundreds of safety deposit boxes containing immeasurable wealth, many of which had been ransacked.
The bank manager must have been very, very shocked indeed. He must have really been biting his lip when he reported to his seniors at Lloyds Bank what had happened. Imagine the effect on the shares market. Imagine the effect on the city that a major bank had been attacked in this manner.
On the Monday morning, we waited with anticipation to see which bank had been robbed, because it was obviously going to be a feature of the news broadcasts. And sure enough, it was. On Radio 4, it was the leading story.
The headlines this morning: a radio ham in London who picked up a conversation between two men using walkie-talkie sets started a hunt for bank robbers.
The police were having to defend themselves because they were being accused of inefficiency and they should have caught the robbers. But they were saying that they'd called in the post office, who were in charge of radio at that stage. Now, the post office said, well, we don't have experts on 24 hours a day, and we called people in specially, but by then it was too late. So you had the police, to an extent, blaming the post office, and the post office blaming the police.
The simple reason was the minor delays were caused by the difficulties in homing in on a signal on a given frequency, which can be wholly inaccurate. It was quite shocking to think that here in the heart of London, this serious crime had been planned and executed with quite an amount of cool criminal endeavour. And at the same time, policing was going on around it.
And of course, the reality was that the bank involved was just a couple of 100 yards from the radio ham's home, where he'd been picking up the broadcasts.
Despite the mass search, the thieves had been carrying out their attack less than 1 mile from where Rowlands and the police had been listening in.
I knew I was right, but the police weren't prepared to accept that I was right. It was a pity they wasted so much time and effort searching 750 banks in the Greater London area.
The most audacious robbery in British history has taken Scotland Yard by surprise. Having listened to a gang of robbers trade remarks on walkie-talkies, officers searched London to catch them in the act, but the gang got away after ransacking a bank vault only a mile from where police were listening in. Now, further revelations come to light.
We'd had robberies where robbers had got in through the ceilings of banks before, but I think this was probably the first that was coming up from under the ground.
The hole in the floor was fairly small. I was quite surprised how small it was. It was about 14 inches by 10 inches, something like that, through thick concrete with a little tunnel coming in.
The devastation around would have been considerable. The debris everywhere would be quite shocking.
The bank staff had started clearing up the mess, and they put up some trestle tables, and on each trestle table they'd identified various items that were lying about in the vault, which the robbers had left behind, thinking they're of no value. And on one table there was a pile of watches and jewellery, another table piled of share certificates and paperwork that had just been thrown on the floor.
People who have that kind of security box don't necessarily volunteer to come forward to be interviewed. And as such, the police would have been seeking the assistance of the bank to identify who the people were who actually owned the boxes.
This crime was one of a kind. The daring gang had somehow managed to dig their way through mounds of earth and rubble to the floor of the vault.
The initial inquiry, of course, which direction was the tunnel going in? Police would not have entered the tunnel immediately. They'd have put their heads down to see which direction it was going in. It would have been rather like treating a scene of an accident involving toxic materials on a motorway. You've got to know what you're dealing with.
With a degree of difficulty, officers eventually traced the tunnel underneath the bank and premises next door to a shop 25 meters away.
Police got into the premises, found brickwork, rubble, earth, sand, all the materials from underneath buildings, and then ascertained just how much equipment was there which had to be protected and forensically examined. A huge job, huge.
Hello Control, this is Alpha 1 Charlie. We need forensics as soon as possible. Over.
This shop, of course, was the operations room from which the individuals, armed with explosives and everything else, have used as their getaway point, as their arrival point, as their store, as their operations room. They had to drill down through the basement floor in that shop. The actual hole itself was small enough to be concealed using shoeboxes. Very, very claustrophobic conditions. And they went about it with a determination that said to me, there's been a major level of planning involved in this.
The scene that faced detectives in the nearby vacant shop was extraordinary. The gang's meticulous planning was evident.
The windows were all whitened up. There was a notice in the front to say reopening 1st September. It was a common feature of the West End of London for this kind of shop to close down and reopen with another style of shop. Anybody visiting the shop would have thought that it was a purely normal premises.
Detectives assessed the scale of the robbery and started the enormous task of finding clues. Meanwhile, rumors about what the gang were looking for in the vault began to circulate.
The rumors made it very, very difficult for the operations room to sort out what was real and what wasn't real.
Allegations that the target was not in fact money and jewels, but compromising photographs of people in power were quickly dismissed by the Yard.
In order to follow up what was factual and dispel that which was rumours such as blackmail, photographs, stuff like that, think in the line of the way the criminal committed his crime. Blackmail material, I would suggest, if it even existed, would not have been the prime target of these criminals, because the simple reason was the kind of individuals that carried out this crime are using explosives and other materials to forcibly enter this bank, and then over 260 security boxes within the bank. Their intention would have been to gather as much of value to them as they could. Secondary stuff like material that you could use for blackmail and stuff like that, if it existed, would have been the furthest thing from their minds, I'm sure.
The police were quick to quash the rumours, only for another twist to appear.
Bob Maguire from the Evening Standard was listening to the cassette, and the police burst into the room, grabbed the telephone from Bob Maguire. He was talking to his editor, and he looked at them, and the policeman turned round and said, "We're putting a D notice on this, and you mustn't talk about it."
There was a ban or an embargo on the Sunday, and the police didn't want to alert the robbers to the fact that they were onto them. D-notices were requests, and there were always requests to editors not to use certain material which was seen as involving national security. Not something like this. There couldn't have been a D-notice because it was fairly widely reported over the following few days.
Despite speculation, the press were keen to focus on other aspects of the case.
You get ordinary people listening in and then tipping off the media to what the police were up to. You also had robbers who'd get equipment in their cars and they would listen into police broadcasts. But this was the other way round. This was the police listening in through the radio ham to what the robbers were up to.
Okay, forensics. I want each and every fibre.
This rare opportunity may have provided a window into the gang's raid, but detectives were starting from scratch at the crime scene.
There was 40 feet of tunnel, ladders, oxyacetylene equipment, explosives, heavy jacking material, a massive amount of material, 800 separate items. Police officers attending there would have taken every step to ensure that that scene was maintained as a crime scene, and whatever was in the tunnel, if there was anything, the ladders, the debris from the offence, the blown concrete, everything to indicate what type of explosives were involved, what kind of fuse was involved to set the explosives off, what kind of thermic lance material. If they'd wanted to keep their identity secret, they'd have had to keep their gloves on all of the time. But of course, it's not only the individual criminal involved, it's who handled the equipment before that. So the task facing the police was one of identification.
Forensic examination of the vault, tunnel and shop began in earnest, but it was a different lead that caught their eye.
We quickly ascertained that the shop was the operations centre, and it was ascertained that the shop had been leased. So from then on, the inquiries based upon the lease of that shop. We had a breakthrough.
Yeah?
What you got?
I've got it. What? The lease.
The investigation exposed the individual involved in the lease of the shop. Suspicion was thrown on him immediately. That was a bonus for the investigation. No doubt, had the criminals had time, I think probably that other techniques would have been used to cover the actual leasing of the shop.
Police had their first major lead, which led them to 64-year-old leather goods dealer Benjamin Wolfe.
Scotland Yard had a brilliant method of locating and identifying who were known associates. So pools of information were coming through from division, from everywhere. The problem was in bringing this together in a coordinated manner so that it became evidence. Surveillance on him and on co-associates was carried out by other colleagues of mine. Within 4 days, we successfully identified individuals who became the main suspects for the crime. We linked them together from inquiries, from investigations, from photographic material in a way that proved that they knew each other.
Weeks of painstaking detective work linked Benjamin Wolfe to a number of associates the Yard was very keen to speak to. Reginald Tucker, 37 years old, a company director from Hackney. Thomas Stevens, 33, a car dealer from Islington. And Anthony Gavin, 38, a photographer from Dalston.
I think they were an amateur gang that decided on a particular event, and probably something triggered it. The man that dug the tunnel, I think, was probably the trigger. Those deposit boxes in Lloyd's Bank were subject to extremely wealthy people putting their things in those boxes.
We eventually were ordered to execute the arrest of the individuals involved. It took us a little bit of time because the individuals involved were very sensitive to surveillance. They were nervous and jumpy.
Ronald Ratcliffe and his team eventually arrested the 4 key suspects.
They were a little bit angry, as you can probably imagine. In terms of violence, no, they didn't offer any violence or anything like that. They came quietly, as the saying is.
With the main targets in custody, Scotland Yard needed answers. Despite analysis of 800 items from the crime scene, no forensic clues were left.
Clearly, when you think of the size of this crime, we were deeply concerned about others, but you need considerable resources, time and evidence to commit to an investigation, and in the end it may have proved fruitless. The actual interviewing of the individuals involved was carried out by the operations team, who had all of the factors at their fingertips, which they could employ in questioning and answering.
What bloody walkie-talkie? It's not me on this.
It was thought that Tony Gavin was the key factor in tunnelling, was the expert, was able to achieve a very, very difficult task in tunnelling from the shop 40 feet through 8 tons of material. So I don't think he was alone in that endeavour, but nevertheless, I think he was a key factor.
Let's make some money.
Thomas Stevens was supposed to have provided tools and tooling, but when you think about it and you put together the kind of planning for the operation, I don't think he was alone in that. I think probably when you look at the fact that they would have needed an explosive expert. They would have needed a man who was confident in using thermic lancing. The thermic lancing isn't something you can just take on and do at the drop of a hat. It requires previous experience. It's believed that Reginald Tucker, using a pseudonym, had previously entered the Lloyd's Bank at Baker Street and taken out the box using false details, and allegedly had carried out the initial measuring of the vault by using his umbrella. My own personal feeling is that due to the accuracy of where the tunnel emerged in the vault, this is a risk that the kind of team planning this operation would not have left to an umbrella. I think that other covert measures of measuring were undertaken, and I think the banking hall was visited probably at least 4 or 5 occasions by individuals who were covert to the operation.
But the gang stonewalled officers. Despite this, Ratcliffe had his own theories on their involvement.
Well, we'll be right there. Cheers, thanks.
The bank itself was wired up with alarms on the windows, the doors, the walls, and the ceilings as well, because there had been robberies through people renting premises above and then dropping down into them. But it seems as though no one had thought about the tunnelling. So what had actually happened on the Sunday afternoon was that the police had visited the bank with the bank security people. They'd gone inside, checked things, found the alarms were all intact.
Hold it, stop!
And in fact, the robbery was still apparently taking place.
Lloyd's Bank in central London has been the target of the most elaborate heist the capital has ever seen. The amount stolen from safety deposit boxes potentially ran into millions of pounds. With no sign of the missing loot, Scotland Yard also learned how officers were just meters away from catching the criminals in action.
We did visit the Lloyd's Bank, but a police officer just doesn't walk into a bank. He relies on authorised personnel to be with him. And so the initial check at the bank and in the area revealed everything to be secure. There was no sign that the vault had been disturbed.
Hold it, stop!
My feelings are that probably they were still inside the bank. They were probably ready to make a quick getaway if they had to, but I think that they'd been achieving quite a lot already.
Despite this close call, the hardened criminals got away, but not for long. A careless oversight on the lease of the shop led detectives to one of their suspects, and the rest unfolded.
I think to use the term, I think you could say that they staged dumb.
We've got your voice on tape.
They eventually pleaded guilty on the advice of their lawyers.
The jury have reached their verdict. Anthony Gavin, Thomas Stevens, Reginald Tucker.
2 years on from the Baker Street heist, a jury found all 4 men guilty of their part in the crime. Anthony Gavin, Reginald Tucker, and Thomas Stevens each received a 12-year jail term. The judge passed down an 8-year sentence to Benjamin Wolfe, taking his age into consideration. The gang gave little away about the robbery, but thanks to their walkie-talkies and what was left at the scene, we can piece together how they pulled off such a heist.
I think there were two separate gang areas, and as such, they were disciplined enough to actually interchange because of fatigue. The digging of this tunnel itself must have been exhausting. The actual claustrophobia of going down through the floor of this shop must have been a big strain on the criminals involved.
I know you're tired, but all the time. It was possible for us to work hard, but all the work done. I've been working non-stop all day.
And shifted 8 tons of material from under the shop, under the premises next door, under the bank, and as such, in doing so, they exposed a well which was underneath. They then used extendable scaffolding type ladders, which I think were used like tram lines to shift the heavy equipment along. But at one stage, of course, they actually tried with, I believe, with a 100-ton jack to press out the floor. But in doing so, it began to press through, push the whatever they were resting the 100-ton jack on through the ground itself, rather than achieve the upward thrust.
We made it.
They knew precisely where they wanted to penetrate the bank. Using thermic lances in enclosed places is extremely dangerous, and they still carried on. They did not give in. They had to resort to explosives to completely make sure that they got into the bank, but in a controlled manner. They used explosives and succeeded in getting in through the flooring without disturbing the doors of the bank.
The gang were relentless, cutting through 2 feet of reinforced concrete from their confined man-made tunnel below.
It was chaotic, but the criminals knew what they were doing. Their main target was to remove valuables.
Once inside the stronghold, they wasted no time smashing open some of the 268 boxes that lay before them. But using heavy-duty industrial equipment eventually proved problematic.
I can hear you. How long do you think you're going to be in there?
There's too much smoke from this thermic lance. I'm making my way back.
Mr. Rowlands heard conversation about somebody being tired and overcome by fumes, and that this individual needed refreshment in the way of tea and sandwiches.
What followed was a bizarre war of words between those trying to reach the vault and the man tasked with making sure the coast was clear.
The weak link was one of their lookout persons. Clearly, he didn't have the discipline that they wanted. He was getting bored, probably cold, probably a little bit frightened, and as such was overusing the radio system. I personally think there was more than one lookout, and probably there was a different frequency being used as well, which Mr. Rowlands was not picking up. When one looks at the amount of equipment that was accrued to carry out this job, they took other means and methods of communication besides the one they were doing.
Despite their differences, it appears the gang decided to have a break partway through the robbery and resumed only to be almost caught when the police called in with the bank manager.
They did not panic, and they knew that they'd got a window of time. Once the bank had been visited, they knew that unless they were visited again, then they had a reasonable amount of time to exit from the premises with the stolen cash, jewellery, and then they managed to get out of the bank by going back through the tunnel, which was an endeavour on its own.
When officers turned on their heels at the vault door, the gang made their getaway.
When they vacated the property, they exited through a rear window in order to leave the property locked and secured, so that even if it drew attention, access was not going to be gained immediately.
The team knew their method of entry would catch the authorities off guard and buy them more time. By the time officers realized they had visited the raided bank, the criminals were well away.
I'm sure that some monies were already into other vaults elsewhere or abroad. The whole element of where to shift monies through money laundering would have been already in action. It's often been put about that there were insiders involved. Personally, I don't believe that, because criminals would not trust an individual who worked in a bank to hold up to keeping the secret long enough that they intended to exploit their knowledge. This would have involved planning for more than at least 2 or 3 months, particularly to get together the equipment.
Some elements of the crime will always remain a mystery. None of the stolen goods were recovered from the raid, and the total value of what was taken has always been open to speculation.
No one will ever know, because some of those boxes may have been full of all sorts of exciting things.
The final estimate was that it was about £1.5 million, which is a lot of money in those days. But no one will ever know precisely, because in these bank boxes, people wouldn't necessarily want it disclosed what they were keeping there.
The Baker Street heist goes down in criminal history thanks to Robert Rowlands honing in on the thieves' radio frequency. But Scotland Yard were keen to pick up on a crime Rowlands himself was committing on the evening.
After the robbery, the police were considering prosecuting me for listening to unlicensed transmissions under the Wireless and Telegraphy Act. They were persuaded not to prosecute me because it would be very bad publicity for the police force, considering that I was trying to help them find the robbers. 15 years later, I got the cassette back. It was hiding in a safe in Paddington Green Police Station in London.
Rowlands was also contacted by Lloyds.
They gave me a cheque for £2,500, which I thought was extremely decent of them.
Such a brazen attack on a bank has not been witnessed in Britain before or after 1971. A final twist in the tale could give an insight into where the gang got their inspiration.
Someone pointed out that Sir Arthur Conan Doyle's fictional detective Sherlock Holmes had investigated a near identical robbery. Now, Sherlock Holmes was supposed to live in Baker Street, and here you have a bank in Baker Street. Now, in one of his stories, he said that he'd learned of some robbers who had dug a tunnel from a shop next door to a bank, had tunneled down, and then had come up into the bank. The only difference between the Sherlock Holmes story and this one was that Sherlock Holmes was waiting inside the bank when the robbers came up through the floor.
During a 2-year reign of terror across the UK, a gang of ruthless robbers targeted high-security depots and cash-in-transit vans.
The guy was on the floor. He was lay on the floor with his hands like this, and he's got a shotgun at his head.
Their method was elaborate and unique, creating devastation in their wake.
There was a huge skip-type vehicle with a ram which had been welded on the front of it, which had been deliberately driven into the wall of the depot.
But each time they struck, they left vital clues, allowing the police to be right on their trail.
They'd actually put a bullet through the window of a Securicore van. Big mistake.
All culminating in one of the biggest showdowns in criminal history.
They came across a firearms vehicle, and the robbers stole that vehicle,
making this one of Britain's biggest heists. The 19th of October 1995, Heists, Salford. Detective Constable Mike Hawkins from the Greater Manchester Police Robbery Unit is called to an urgent job.
Upon arrival, I was greeted with carnage, really, for want of a better way of putting it. There was a huge skip-type vehicle which had been deliberately driven into the wall of the depot. So, as you can imagine, the wall of the depot was pretty much non-existent anymore.
A ruthless gang had their sights on the large sums of money stored at the top security depot and stopped at nothing to get it.
The wall that was driven into had a direct access into the vault. The vault could sometimes hold millions of pounds. So it really was a case of fill your boots as fast as you can at the scene for those involved and flee before the police arrived.
Three armed men went into the vault. The staff were terrified. One man got a sawn-off shotgun put to his head, and they're shouting at him. And there's no need. It's just totally pointless violence. The men were frightened, they were compliant, and the staff were on the floor, they weren't doing anything. And then one of them put a bullet through the roof.
In less than 2 minutes, the armed gang had ransacked the place and fled with a major amount of cash.
There was a huge amount of money which was stolen from the raid, £770,000 in total, which was a lot of cash for those who committed this type of crime to be able to steal.
It's a heavy hit for the cash in transit industry to take. Earlier that year, there'd been a £6.5 million robbery at a depot in Salford. Securicore suffered that loss. And these types of robberies were of the order that the industry couldn't sustain them. If we didn't take this team out, we would probably have seen the collapse of the cash and transit industry.
This was no ordinary robbery, it had been pre-planned. There's obviously quite a lot of thought gone into the process by those who were involved, and it was very much different than your normal type robbery.
The police needed to act fast. With a vehicle left at the scene and a firearm discharged inside, forensic officers set off to work.
We had the bullet that had been put through the roof, quite a significant piece of evidence, and we had that analysed at the firearms laboratory. That then gives us a key, and that can link us to other scenes, to other robberies. As it happened, this would appear to be the first time that this weapon had been used, and there were no other discharges on record.
No leads had come from the bullet, but the investigation team kept the information on file. Yet other items left behind proved to be vital clues.
We were able to recover what's known as a tachograph, which gives some indication around the journey that the vehicle has taken.
A tachograph is a device found in large vehicles that measures the speed, distance, and duration of a journey.
Fortunately, it hadn't been in the vehicle for too long, so it hadn't been overscored repeatedly.
And we were able to determine from that tachograph that the vehicle had come from close to that location, an industrial park in Radcliffe.
This was a major breakthrough. The police had a specific location where the vehicle had possibly been stored, Beeley Industrial Estate. And this wasn't the first time it had been on their radar.
We'd had an attack at Pilsworth in Bury. The attack was outside the cinema. A white Transit blocked the front of the cash and transit van, and then it'd been rammed from the rear by a modified Land Rover. The Land Rover itself had been stolen from Rossendale. They'd made a right mess of the Securicorps van, but they weren't successful and didn't get away with any cash. What they'd welded on the front of that was like a ram with a plate on the front of that, and I've got to say he had a bit of a sense of humour. Because what he'd done on the front of the Land Rover, when it'd been pinched on the grille, there was a horseshoe. And what he did was he welded the horseshoe on the front of the ram. Another significant attack that became relevant for us was at Tesco's in Mather Avenue in Liverpool. What happened there is a flatback wagon had been used, and that had been stolen from Rochdale. Again, that's not far from Pilsworth. The gang had welded a sort of a crossed spike onto the back of this vehicle. And what this vehicle had done then, it had then reversed into a waiting Securicorps van. And in the cab of this was a tachograph. So what the scientists did then was then piece together the journey that this vehicle had taken over those intervening days. They were able to take us to an industrial estate in Radcliffe, Beeley Industrial Estate.
So evidence from 2 previous robberies in Bury and Liverpool linked back to this place in Radcliffe. These small units were now of major importance to this growing investigation. And another aspect of the robberies was recurring each time.
What we found was another significant feature was that there was an M-Series BMW used as the getaway vehicle, and that vehicle was later found abandoned in Garston in Liverpool.
With these common features, a worrying pattern was now emerging.
We were aware that there was a potential for a series developing here. We'd had an attack at Pilsworth in Bury, not far from the industrial estate. We knew that they'd stolen a vehicle from Rochdale. Again, that's not too far off. And we knew that they were using a venue to house these vehicles in. You can't just stand on the street welding a ram on the front of a van or a Land Rover. Somebody would probably ring it in because it looked suspicious. So to actually have a potential venue for us was quite exciting.
Now the business park was a main line of inquiry, thanks to the tachographs found at Salford and Liverpool.
I can't tell you how significant Beeley Industrial Estate was to us at that time.
But the large estate housed many businesses, so honing in on one particular base could prove to be tricky.
There was lots of different industrial units on there, lots of different types of industry taking place in there, some small units, some big units. Any one of them could have housed a vehicle, any one of them could have been used for welding. And we couldn't let the robbers know that we were actually not far off them now. Had we started to make open investigations at Beeley Industrial Estate, whoever they were using on that estate would have told the robbers and they'd have moved. And our task now was to actually see what else we could get with a view to identifying the unit they were using, then we could start mounting technical attacks upon them.
One wrong move could blow the operation before any further intelligence was gathered. But gradually, information directed them to a specific area.
Units 9, 9A and 9B was a key point for us, a real key point in the investigation.
It was quite possible they'd use the same location time after time, and we're able to narrow down significantly where the vehicle originated from.
We had a specific location now, and when we started to look at this, it became more and more clear to us that this was the place they were using, this is the place where the welding was taking place, and this is the place they were storing the stolen vehicles.
Undercover officers were deployed to stake out the units and discover who exactly was behind the vehicles.
It can be quite complicated to set up an observation post without anyone else being aware, not just those who are involved in the crime, but other people, because that attracts attention. So we've got to make sure that we're able to get in and out on a regular basis, if need be, without people seeing us.
So over the coming days, the investigation continued. We started to build our evidential case. We started to see factors that became significant. We start to see people appearing, and the most regular attender at Beeley Industrial Estate was a guy called David Fletcher.
David Fletcher, 34 years old, from Manchester, a welder with no previous convictions and not known to the police.
David Fletcher was the welder who operated and rented the premises.
With no further intelligence on Fletcher, officers continued their surveillance, and gradually more faces became familiar at the industrial estate.
We start then to spread out to other members of the gang. We had Lawrence Brown, or Loz Brown, who turned up on a number of occasions.
Lawrence Brown, 36 years old, from Salford, a known robber who had a track record with Greater Manchester Police.
He lived in a house in Heights. He got previous convictions for wagon theft. It was actually on bail at the time that we started to look at him for trying to steal a wagon in Stockport. He tried to assault the officers. See from the picture, I think he came off worse.
Crucially, a key element from the Salford heist now placed Brown in the frame.
We had the BMW that was the M series that was abandoned near Lawrence Brown's house.
This vehicle was picked up and became vital evidence. Officers also discovered that the HGV used in this latest robbery had been stolen from Swinton, just a few miles from Brown's house. Now, two local lads, Brown and Fletcher, were in the officers' sights, but more intelligence was needed and time was running out.
And we start to drill into the detail around them. You start with where do they live, who do we know that visits them, what can we gain by watching the house, who's attending at the house, what phone number are they using, who they're ringing, who's ringing them. And then you start to branch that out, and that's where the investigation led us into Graham Dorian. Dorian was actually the brother of Brown's common-law wife.
Graham Dorian was a 32-year-old local lad with a criminal past.
Graham Dorian is from Salford. He was a boxer and trained in local gyms.
No obvious means of support, no obvious means of income on benefits, and was regularly seen at the Brown household. Loz Brown and Graham Dorian spent a lot of time together, appear to be quite good friends.
Surveillance now flagged up 3 men from Greater Manchester who clearly knew each other. And delving into phone activity uncovered a deeper network.
We did come to use cell sighting. What you could do was, as people tracked across the country, their phones would give an electronic handshake to different cell sites, in the same way that a piece would move across a chessboard.
And this cell sighting was to highlight a lot of activity coming from certain phones 30 miles away in Liverpool. One phone linked to Kevin Kennedy, a 27-year-old with previous history for robbery.
Kevin Kennedy, he lived on an estate in Speke. He, again, no visible means of support, no income. We also then had a guy called David Hill who kept featuring on the phone billing that we were looking at.
David Hill was a 46-year-old previously known to Merseyside police.
Couldn't quite understand what his involvement was to start with, and he lived in the sort of south side of Liverpool.
Officers now had a link between 3 Manchester lads and 2 Liverpudlians, but separate gangs associating together was rare, if not unheard of. Then another man came onto their radar. Andrew Scroggy, a 28-year-old previously known to police.
Scroggy was a Birmingham lad who was very much linked into David Hill and the Liverpool side, and he did feature at Los Brown's house on one occasion, and we saw him in and out of the garages. They had a couple of lock-up garages in Garston, which they also came to use to store stolen cars in that, and we had him and Kevin Kennedy going to and from the garages.
Certain men were now identified, and a link was emerging between Manchester, Birmingham, and Liverpool.
I've never seen a gang since operating this way. It's very rare that you get gangs which come together, if you like, from 2 different or 3 different parts of the country, even Manchester, Liverpool and Birmingham. The whole setup of the gang, the way in which they operated, it was completely unique.
But police still had nothing more to go on other than phone records and association from the surveillance conducted. Yet officers could tell things were gearing up again at the units.
We saw a skip wagon going in. That straight away puts us on our alert. We don't know what they're doing with it, but we're looking at a team that modifies HGVs. For our money, it was going to be used in an attack, and that's what they were building to. So we start to build forward, we start to stand to. As we're building to look to, do we need to arrest, should we be going in under a warrant? We've got the premises under observation and the skip wagon comes out. And it's like, oh my God, what are we going to do?
A prolific gang of armed robbers have stolen almost £1 million from a security depot in Salford and attempted at least 2 more heists but failed. Greater Manchester police are watching their every move and biding their time. But the thieves are on the go once more, and this time a depot in Bolton is their target.
What we then did, we mounted a sort of loose surveillance and took it to the Bolton area, and all we could do was just stop them. They didn't know that we were onto them, and the last thing we wanted was to blow this at this point in the investigation. So what we did, we got a high-profile response in the Bolton area, and it was abandoned and the team made off, and they left it not far from the Securicor depot, so we'd actually prevented a robbery. Again, we had significant recoveries in relation to the skip wagon. It was this one where I saw the welder's sense of humour come to the fore again. He'd welded an L, like a learner plate, on the back of the wagon. Straight away, as soon as I saw it, I thought, this is the same guy who's done Pillsworth. It's the same weld, it's got to be. Because it's very unusual to see that sort of humour display within an armed robbery team.
Now, with 3 failed robberies, the police were certain it was the same gang in action each time, but couldn't connect the Liverpool team with Manchester other than by phone records, until a piece of intelligence led them to a prison in Warrington.
Los Brown had tried to steal a wagon and assaulted an officer. He got 3 months, and that put a spanner in the works, shall I say, for the investigation, because if he's in prison, we can't follow him. What we did get from that was probably one of the breaks that came to the investigation. We got information that there was going to be a visit to Los Brown, and The visit came in the form of, it was Graham Dorian from Manchester, Kevin Kennedy turned up from Liverpool. Absolute manna from heaven. It put the two teams together. We got physical association between Manchester and Liverpool for the first time, and it was a real air-punching moment. Yes, we got them together.
We liaised on a regular basis with Merseyside Police, but we also worked quite closely with the National Crime Squad. But it was a balancing act, really, around what we could tell other forces and even certain members of our own force to make sure that the information which we knew was kept as sensitive as possible.
The team were now linked and on camera, but still needed to be caught in the act.
Brown comes out of prison and we see them start in the process of setting up what appears to be like a scaffolding firm. And then we have Brown and Dorian, Lawrence Brown and Graham Dorian, go to Liverpool.
No sooner is Lawrence Brown out of prison, the gang seem to be organising yet another job.
They drive off, they get on the M6. We thought they were going to London, perhaps to do a bit of work. Might have been to do with the scaffolding, didn't really know. Got to Birmingham and we pulled the surveillance.
As officers stood down, Brown and Dorian made their way down south for the weekend.
Saturday morning, I was at home, I remember it. They went down to Dartford in Kent and robbed a Securicorps depot. Got £440,000. And I was absolutely livid. We'd missed a real golden opportunity, a real golden egg that had gone. And if we'd been with them, we could have had them. And it really hurt, that, really hurt.
The gang had now racked up at least 5 armed raids up and down the country, starting on their patch, but now terrorising other parts of the UK. They'd walked away from 2 heists with a total of £1.1 million and showed no signs of stopping. With this latest theft, the police had been caught off guard, but all was not lost.
They'd actually put a bullet through the window of a Securicorps van. Big mistake for them, because that helped us to forensically link them to the robbery at Heists. Same gun, same bullet, markings.
And the phone traffic painted a very interesting picture.
The first thing we see, and it's quite comical really, is after the robberies, they're on the way home, they all start ringing their wives and partners and girlfriends. But we didn't have the cell sighting as evidence, it was intelligence, and that was a frustration for us. That would have probably nailed the hats on.
It's fair to say that the gang had grown in reputation and size by that time. Obviously, they'd been committing these offences, and we were somewhere 2 years down the line, I should say, which gives you an indication of how professional they were in respect to the robberies that they were committing as well. Because by that time, we'd pretty much identified who the individuals that were involved, and it was just a matter, really, of catching them, if you like, in the act.
Resources are pulled in from all around the country to get more intelligence on the gang and step up surveillance. And before long, another twist appears.
They were following Brown, and he drives down to Bute Street, which is not far from the Heists depot that they'd robbed in Salford. And as the surveillance officers are watching him, he gets out of his car and he climbs on the roof of what appear to be an industrial premises that are actually to let. And he pulls some of the shuttering away from the side, and he goes inside. And this is like, well, what's going on here? As it happens, Fletcher was coming to the end of his lease. I think he was behind with his rent as well, which was a problem for him. He had quite significant financial problems at the time. And then they actually came to lease it. Fletcher leased the unit, and the robbery team relocated to Heists, to Bute Street.
The gang now had a new base, suggesting the intention to continue their crime spree. Officers needed to know their next plan and be one step ahead, so special measures were resorted to.
So we started to do our own covert entries. He'd been in, so we decided we'd go in and have a look as well, all properly warranted. And we actually installed various cameras within the premises.
But with this covert operation came huge risks.
We got a bit concerned when you start leaving hard copy devices in places. You've got risks. Brown actually came right up to one of them, and we thought he was going to swallow it. He got that close to it.
One of Britain's largest police operations is tracking a violent gang intent on fleecing the country's security system of millions of pounds. Officers have already missed a vital opportunity to catch the raiders at a depot in Kent and cannot afford to be caught off guard again. Now the cunning team are in their sights, but to bring them down will take major resources, particularly at the hub of the criminal network.
We'd done that by installing a number of covert cameras at the location, which also included inside the unit, and we were able to monitor the cameras from a distance of about 5-10 miles away in order to watch when they were coming and going and what was going on inside the unit without anybody taking any unnecessary risks, if you like, in the locality.
We got a bit concerned when you start leaving hard copy devices in places. You've got risks. And we decided that the chances are that if we leave them there, they might get found. And if they get found, we've had it. And the point at which we decided to remove them, Brown actually came right up to one of them, and we thought he was going to swallow it. He got that close to it, and it was a case of, right, let's get the cameras out, that's enough. We're not risking this anymore.
Officers had come within inches of being discovered, but despite having to pull this part of the operation, the footage captured told an incredible story.
And we see stolen HGV going. So we keep monitoring the progress on this, thinking, right, they're at it again. This is going to be the next robbery vehicle. They paint it, and we keep going and having a look at what's going on. And then they start to rip the floor out of the inside of the back, exposing the cross members. And then what we see being built slowly over a period of days is a ram, a telescopic ram. They'd repainted it. I think they'd repainted it white from blue. You could pull the roll shutter door down and you'd be none the wiser. Lift the roll shutter door up and you can pull the ram out and you could put locking pins in it. And there you had an effective and viable device.
And taking no chances, undercover officers continued the surveillance once the cameras were removed.
We'd have specially trained officers to get into premises and gather evidence. We'd have a layer of protection around them, and then what they'd do, they'd go in and they'd take photographs, they'd record their observations, they'd take pictures of the ram, and they took pictures of the van, general pictures, and so that when they were coming back to us to tell us what had happened, it was like, yeah, and this is what we've seen. Very rare for you to actually witness an offence taking place. What's even rarer is to be in the position that we were in, where we're watching them prepare, and the evidential opportunities that we came across there were huge.
For weeks, vital information was fed back to the robbery unit, and it was clear preparations were being made for another hit. Then Mike and his team received crucial intelligence.
We had an indication that they were about to commit a further offence in Poole in Dorset.
They set off in convoy. Scroggy leaves Bute Street in the HGV and they all start to travel south. And we're following Scroggy because he's in the vehicle with the ram. That's the one that we're going to stay with because that's the one that's going to be there when the robbery happens, and that's where we want to be.
Travelling the length of the country meant nationwide cooperation from each police force and a massive operation. On top of this, officers faced a dilemma.
The problem which we had were that there was a number of depots which could have been the intended target, and we hadn't got specific information as to which depot that would be. We were able to identify 3 in the locality.
The gang could strike at any of the 3 vaults, and officers knew they were prone to violence. But time was running out, and dozens of staff could be in grave danger.
We've told the staff in all 3 vaults, just lock it down, get yourself somewhere secure, and stay tight, stay safe till we get there.
As the depot staff quickly scrambled to safety, a shock was in store.
So we were literally on the phone at the time when the wagon was driven into the wall.
We have one of our officers on the phone, and in the conversation you can actually hear this shuddering crunch as the wall gets breached, and you can hear the panic in the employee's voice. The penny's dropping, this is happening, and it's happening here to me. Terrifying place to be in, but he was safe, he was perfectly safe where he was.
The member of staff was incredibly surprised as to what was happening and the fact that he got a police officer on the phone who was describing the events that were going to happen to him at the time they were actually happening.
The 3 robbers go in, one waits outside in the M-Series BMW.
Well, the unfortunate thing for them was they were greeted with nothing. Much to their surprise, there were no staff on the premises, and to some extent we've been able to secure the money. So having gone to all the trouble of driving all the way down to Poole in Dorset, driving the wagon through the wall, they were left with absolutely nothing, so I should imagine they had a rather look of surprise on their face.
And they try to get into the vault. They can't because it's all been locked down. And then you hear a rapid succession of gunshots. It's very rare, probably unheard of, to have a member of staff from a cash in transit vault on the phone to a police officer whilst it's being robbed. Virtually, I've never known it happen before, and I doubt I ever will again.
Despite a futile attempt to shoot the lock from the vault door, there was no way of getting to the cash. Empty-handed, the ruthless gang were now within the premises, and it was time for the police to close in.
What we're doing at this time is the resources, the firearms resources have been mobilised, and they're starting to be called in to actually confront these men with a firearms team.
Despite an incredible amount of effort, the thieves were now helpless and could not reach the cash now safely locked in the vault. It seemed like this time, the police were one step ahead.
We'd received information that the 4 robbers had been detained and that they'd not stolen anything from the depot. So if you can imagine, the champagne corks were popping at the headquarters.
But the celebrations were short-lived.
They'd been thwarted, really. They're frustrated in their attempts to steal any cash this time. Come out of the vault, jump into the M-Series BMW and make off. Unfortunately, the HGV had blocked the road, and our firearms team was on one side and the BMW was on the other.
This was now the gang's 6th armed attack, and despite the police being so close, they'd somehow managed to get away.
And 2 minutes later, we get a call to say nobody's been detained.
I'm not going to believe this. They got it wrong. They've got away. Oh.
With the gang armed, dangerous, and on the loose, officers were under immense pressure to find them, and fast.
What then happens is, for whatever reason, they abandoned that BMW because they didn't have another vehicle. What they do then is they disappear off into the gardens of the nearby houses.
What actually happened at that point was an unmarked car. The officers that were inside the car, all suitably firearms trained, were also dressed in civilian or plain clothes. The robbers approached that vehicle probably thinking they were members of the public. They placed their firearms up against the window of the car and instructed the firearms officers to open the car and get out. The firearms officers, obviously fearing for their lives at that stage, quite rightly so, then vacated their vehicle. And the robbers stole that vehicle.
You're never going to believe what's happened.
Greater Manchester Police are in the throes of bringing down one of the most prolific gangs ever to hit the UK. Having received intelligence about their next hit, officers race to Poole in Dorset to arrest the thieves in action. But the result is far from what was anticipated. The gang leave the vault empty-handed, but manage to flee the scene.
They come across a Dorset armed response vehicle that was on the outer perimeter. The officers in it have got no idea what's happening. The first thing they see is a guy at my door. He had a gun at my head. I remember the officer who sat on the back seat, and she said she did consider drawing a weapon. The problem was they were in a built-up area. Now, if she'd have started shooting and they'd have started shooting, bullets could have gone anywhere, and you could have had members of the public shot and, God forbid, killed. So yeah, they made off the Dorset armed response vehicle.
The irony of it is at that stage, the robbers didn't even know that they had stolen a firearms police car.
With the gang on the loose, each officer knew of the dangers ahead.
What we're going to do? They've got away again. So it's start again. Start from scratch.
We felt incredibly disappointed, as you'll appreciate. This had been an investigation which had been running for years, and to think for 1 minute that everybody had been arrested, and then to find out 2 minutes later that nobody had been arrested and they'd kidnapped a firearms car was incredibly disappointing for the investigation. It's fair to say at that point that the cavalry were turned out. We had marked police vehicles which were swamping the area around Poole and Dorset. The police helicopter was sent up to conduct observations. And we were able to ascertain in a reasonably short space of time that they'd abandoned the firearms vehicle and were now in and around the south of the UK on foot.
Teams of officers scoured the south of the country to locate the robbers.
Sometime after the robbery had been committed on that evening, we were able to ascertain through CCTV that two of the individuals who were responsible for the offence, Lawrence Brown and Graham Dorian, had found their way to Euston Station in London.
With this lead, it was critical for the police to consider their next move and close in at the right moment.
And it was apparent at that stage that they were making their way back to the northwest. And it was highly likely that they were going to do that by catching a train at Euston to Manchester. So we tried to get ahead of the game again and see if we could deploy firearms officers. Problem which we had was the train was due to arrive on a Friday night around 11 p.m, which, as you can imagine, is a very busy time. So it wasn't possible to deploy firearms officers.
They are watched very closely. We note that they're carrying 2 holdalls, one each. Quite bulky holdalls. The next thing, we have a sighting of them outside Corner House, which is the picture house in Manchester.
It was an incredible pressure cooker situation within the control room. We've got 2 individuals who are armed, who are travelling up to Manchester. We've got them under surveillance by officers who are not armed.
With the lack of firearms officers around to assist, Mike and his team had to make a split-second decision.
We were left in a dilemma, really, as to what to do with the 2 individuals. So the investigation team, following a very brief discussion, decided that if need be, we would effect the arrest ourselves. And that carried a huge degree of risk at the time. But such was the desire, coupled with the frustration of the investigation team, that we made a decision that night that we were going to arrest them.
Show's on. Yeah, we're going to do it ourselves. Over.
This was an opportunity which didn't arise very often. If we couldn't catch them at the scene, the next best thing to do was to catch them away from the scene, still in possession of the firearms. Bear in mind there'd be a huge amount of forensic evidence which would be available to us if we got them that night.
And they went out to Corner House, got out of the cars, parked up, and then came round the corner, acting like a group of Saturday night drunks.
And it literally happened in a matter of seconds. We were close enough with the instruction that was given by the officer who was nearest to the two individuals, and very quickly we had 8 to 10 police officers who had jumped on these two individuals. They were forced to the floor, and we were able to disarm them pretty quickly. There was quite a violent struggle which happened. As I say, they were in possession of firearms, so we were able really to justify what we were doing.
After 2 years following this prolific gang throughout the country, it culminated in a dramatic showdown back in Manchester. With Dorian and Brown now finally arrested, the team had their sights on the other perpetrators.
Fletcher's house is searched. And not only have we got him on surveillance of the 2 units, we've actually got a sketch, you know. He's got a drawing of the ram he's constructed, hand-drawn by him in his house. So get out of that one, you know. We've got Dorian and Brown, and we've got Fletcher. All charged with a conspiracy.
10 weeks ago. Anybody with a black BMW?
And it was some time before we were able to locate Kennedy and Scroggy.
For the record, you're saying no. So
Scroggy was eventually detained overseas, and he was brought back to the UK to answer the allegations.
Pictures that show you. Nice.
Kevin Kennedy had fled to Amsterdam.
As officers liaised with the police in Amsterdam, 4 of the gang members went on trial.
We went to trial in that November of 1996 with Dorian, Brown, Scroggy and Fletcher. Fletcher pleaded guilty at the outset.
I've got a photograph of it.
2 years and 6 violent attacks on. 4 of the gang were found guilty of their crimes. Lawrence Brown received 20 years imprisonment. Graham Dorian, 16. Andrew Scroggy, 12, reduced to 10 on appeal. And David Fletcher, 5 years for their parts in the robberies. Now, the mission was to find the rest of the elusive gang and recover any of the missing millions.
We had a breakthrough really towards the end of the criminal investigation as to what they were doing with the money.
We start to see that they're all getting huge cheques, 20, 30,000 from bookies. So what's all this about? They can't all be successful gamblers.
Yeah, Steve, it's Mike. Listen, I think I'm onto something with these money transfers.
Before long, another man entered the frame. Jason Metcalf, a 24-year-old money launderer from Aintree who had connections with the side of the gang in Liverpool.
He was a compulsive gambler, but he would bet on short-order events, football matches, cricket matches. He would place accumulators. And although he was still losing, wasn't losing an awful lot, and he was losing approximately 10 to 15%, which, as far as a launderer is concerned, is highly efficient.
This method of money laundering was new to the police, and as such, the gang had so far managed to fly below the radar and minimize the risk of losing their spoils. Metcalf's intricate knowledge of the betting system meant a lesser chance of losing it all to the bookies.
We went through a painstaking analysis of betting slips, over 1,000 betting slips, to try and actually work out how much Jason had won or lost whilst he'd been conducting this process. He used to walk into the bookmakers with anything up to £30,000, £40,000 in any one day. And bet away with that. I mean, the trick with money laundering is to hide it away from the authorities as best they can. So rather than Mr. Brown receiving a cheque for £50,000 on a regular basis from the bookmakers, which might alert suspicions, They found other people who were prepared to take cheques of £5,000, £10,000, sometimes as much as £50,000, and they'd keep it in a bank account with the intention of transferring it at a later stage.
The gang's method of filtering the money had allowed them to go undetected for some time, but now unearthed led the police to further leads.
We start to move into looking at the other members of the robbery team. We arrest David Hill, and he's brought in, interviewed, and he's charged, goes to trial, as was Metcalfe. It's also around this time that we identify where Kevin Kennedy's gone, and he was staying in a flat on Singel in Amsterdam. It was actually cheaper to hire a private jet to bring him in, and we brought him into a small airfield where he was met by a firearms convoy and taken straight to the police station, then to jail.
Greater Manchester Police now had who they believed to be the ringleader in Hill and the money launderer with Metcalfe. As they went on trial, Kennedy was brought back to the UK and decided to talk.
Kennedy entered a guilty plea. I think Kennedy got 16 years. Hill got 20 years, and Jason Metcalfe was convicted on 3 specimen charges of money laundering, got 5 years on each.
So we were very pleased that all those years of efforts had resulted in lengthy prison sentences.
And having traced where the stolen cash was being fed to, the team got one of the rarest results in criminal history.
All in all, we recovered about £990,000. And if you remember, there was £1.1 million in cash taken. We recovered almost all of it. Hugely successful recovery. And that went back to Securicorps and Armaguard.
Money is the lifeblood of all crime, predominantly. And it's nice to think that when they serve the years, they'll essentially be coming out to nothing.
In the summer of 1995, a gang of masked men viciously attacked a security van in Salford, Greater Manchester.
This was the largest single robbery offence that I've ever been involved in investigating. This is the largest, at its time, it was the largest cash robbery in Europe.
Over £6 million was stolen when the van was dramatically ambushed at a security depot.
And the next thing I heard was from one of the girls, the van's gone. And from there then, it was just panic all over.
The heavily armed thugs stopped at nothing to get their millions, taking a guard hostage and fleeing with the money, making this one of Britain's biggest heists. The 3rd of July in Manchester city centre. Securicorps workers Louis Headon and Graham Huckabee were starting their shift at one of the company's depots.
Graham had only worked with me a couple of times on this run, because my regular partner were doing something else. Well, we started work at 6 o'clock. Normally had a cup of tea before we kicked off. And whoever was driving, whether it was me or my partner, on that particular day it was me, so I get the keys, go out and get the van, and pull up into the queue outside the vaults.
Large amounts of cash and cheques from various businesses around the city were stored in a central vault to be collected by Securicorps staff and taken to nearby depots.
With it being a Monday, you got the whole weekend's takings. So the volume was probably 3, 4, 5 times as much as what you get the rest of the week.
It took over an hour to load the millions of pounds into their secure van before the pair set off on the 1.5-mile journey to their first stop, the Midland Check Clearing Centre in Salford, to offload some of the takings.
We then pull up to the ramp with the back end facing the loading bay, so the van could be reversed in when required. Well, then Graham, he gets in the driver's seat so we can start to reverse in. I would then proceed to the Midland Check Centre door, where a camera would be looking down at me. I'd ring the bell. Once he'd verified who I was, I'd show my ID card.
As Louis was one of only a handful of key custodians, he was responsible for entering the centre and going through the necessary security checks before unloading the bags.
The outside door opened, you then went in to an inner door, and then they shut the outside door. Once that was closed, they then let you into the inner door. And then you go to another door with a little latch in it, where the girls would come and process you, check your ID again, check your signature. And once that was verified, they then let you out.
On a normal day, Louis would help navigate the van into the secure area.
They'd then proceed to lift up the loading bay door, and the van would start to reverse in. I would then go to the back of the van to make sure it was fully in, and then they'd shut the loading bay door then. Until that happened, we couldn't proceed to unload the van.
But this run would prove to be very different.
We'd done all the verification, so she knew who I was. She then presses a button to open the outside door to let me out again. As soon as she opens that outside door, they then proceed to lift up the loading bay shutter door. And the door couldn't have been more than a couple of feet off the ground, and she shouted, "There's a man in a mask inside the loading bay."
Within seconds, the staff were under threat. A masked man was brandishing a gun at one of the doors and trying to gain entry.
So presumably he got under the door to try and either get to me or one of the girls who held us hostage. Once he realised he couldn't get in to the main part of the bank, he must have ducked her back under the door again, and then they brought the shutter door down.
Within seconds, the intruder was completely out of sight. Louis and his colleagues had no way of knowing where he had vanished to. And to add to the fear, one staff member was still in the van outside.
I presume that Graham would not let him into the van because they couldn't get into the van without somebody pressing a button which controls an electric lock which opens the door.
Locked inside the centre, Louis had no idea what was happening to his colleague in the van.
I'm inside 2 doors, so there's nobody can get to me, either, well, from the outside, because they're all electric locks anyway, and they're all steel doors, and the door inside the loading bay is 2 double doors, which are barred and bolted from the inside of the bank. I couldn't see nothing. All I've got is a little screen above, well, inside the bank, and that only shows the loading bay. It doesn't show the outside. No, not from where I'm standing, anyway.
Louis' only connection to the drama unfolding was news from his colleagues.
And the next thing I heard was from one of the girls, the van's gone. And from there, then, it was just panic all over. They were panicking. I didn't know where the van were. They didn't know where the van were.
What can we do?
Louis stood inside an airlock with no communication to the outside, had no idea what had happened to his partner, Graham.
Nobody knows who's going to react in that situation unless it's happening to you. I mean, I'm stood in the bank, reasonably safe. He's sat in the driver's seat. They say that them screens are strong enough to take a shot, but are you going to take that chance? So do you let them in, or do you just take a chance and drive off, you know. I mean, the vehicle's skin is double skin, so a shot won't go through that. But I wouldn't like to be sat behind that glass with a gun pointed to me.
Once the staff was certain the gang were no longer in the vicinity, they released the doors for Louis to raise the alarm.
I just said the van's been taken. Whether or not it'd been taken by people that shouldn't have took it or Graham had drove it away, I don't know.
Millions of pounds were now missing, and Louis had no way of knowing if his colleague had been seriously hurt. All he could do was wait for officers to arrive.
When officers first went there, one of the guards, Lou Heedon, was actually still at the clearing centre. He'd been left there. As you get with any attendance at any crime scene, there's initially some confusion.
As police began to assess the scene, another alarm was raised nearby.
But within a very short space of time, they'd located Graham Huckabee just around the corner with the abandoned cash-in-transit van.
Graham Huckabee had been found by some workmen, handcuffed to railings with the van's contents nowhere to be seen.
It was approximately a mile and a half from the Midland Check Centre, round the back of some units. Couldn't be seen from the road. Bit of waste ground, if you like, behind units. And the van was just lying there, both doors open. Nothing on it at all. Been stripped.
The Midland Check Clearing Centre in Salford has been the scene of a terrifying raid. With one driver locked inside the centre, unable to see what was happening, the van carrying over £6 million in cash and cheques vanished. Now officers are facing a second crime scene.
You're looking for potential for fingerprints, fibres, massive paperwork, bits of paper scattered everywhere. And then you've got, effectively, Graham Huckabee, who's a scene in his own right.
As officers quickly tended to Graham Huckabee, a scan of the area uncovered other vital clues.
We didn't just have one crime scene, we had 3 straight away. Because the cash-in-transit van had been taken away from the Midland Bank DSC with a white Ford Transit van. That had then followed it to Hope Street. The contents of the cash-in-transit van had then been emptied into the white Ford Transit van, and then that had been driven just around the corner to Upper Wharf Street, and then the white Ford Transit was emptied, which came to be one of the main lines of enquiry. And it turned out that that had been stolen some weeks before in the London area. We searched that van for any trace of any evidence that we could get from it, and we actually found a business card.
Checks were made on the business card. Meanwhile, officers at the Midland Centre scoured the place for footage that could shed any light on the raid.
What's important from the investigation's point of view is early recovery of CCTV, which is where our first difficulty came.
The bank had more than a dozen cameras monitoring inside and outside the building. But just 5 minutes before the robbery, most went dead.
Unfortunately, there'd been a problem with it that morning and it wasn't on. So we didn't have any footage of potentially what had taken place, which hampered us quite significantly.
With no images from the crime scene, the police widened their search.
What we also do is a CCTV trawl around the area to see what opportunities there are for recorded imageries, recorded data around what's gone on. And we actually only found one camera, which was on the junction of Regent Road and West Edgerton Street. And we got footage, the only footage actually from the robbery, of the cash-in-transit van with a white Ford Transit van.
This footage connected the van to the robbery, but didn't provide officers with any images of the thieves. Detectives questioned staff at the bank to see if they could shed any light.
Well, they just asked what the procedure was, what we did on that particular day, what time we started, what we did, where we went, what time we're supposed to be there, and I just made a statement to that fact.
I was in the building and the girl screamed.
Checking all your records, obviously, you know. That kind of money involved, they're checking you haven't got Rembrandts on the wall and you haven't got massive bank accounts and a Rolls Royce parked outside, you know.
Officers eliminated certain members of staff as the investigation continued, but holes started to appear in the company procedure.
They shouldn't really put the cash on the van because part of the agreement with the Midland Bank, part of their service agreement, was that the vehicles that serviced there wouldn't take cash on the premises because it was a threat, it was an enhanced risk.
Well, they should have had one van for the checks and one van for the cash. I've asked many and many a time, why can't they split this money? Well, we haven't got the vans to spare, we haven't got the crews to spare, we haven't got this, we haven't got that. It was all play it by ear.
So the second breach of security policy which the crew operated was the fact that when the van went out on the road, it went with 2 cabby keys.
Both of these deadlock keys were placed in the inner and outer doors at the same time, opening up a passageway to easily move the money.
It was acceptable within the vault to have 2 cabby keys, to have both van doors, the inner and outer airlock doors open. It quite clearly wasn't acceptable to take both cabby keys out on the road because effectively you could access the internal workings of the van quite easily. Because those cabby keys were on the van, when the robbers came to unload it, they quite simply did what Security Corps personnel would have done had they got into the Midland Bank and had both doors open.
The breach of major protocols meant not only was there over £6 million in cash and checks in one van, but the gang had easy access and the means to offload it, all at speed.
By the second day, it was clear to me that this was something extraordinary. And it was quite interesting because I was getting phone calls from members of the Salford underworld saying, what's going on? And they were telling me that the Salford teams, if you like, were trying to find out who was responsible for pulling this off in their manner.
Even local criminals had apparently been caught off guard, which gave an indication that this had been organised on a much larger scale. Now all the money had gone and the investigation was growing by the hour.
There were a number of vehicles cited and you're never sure whether a vehicle's a legitimate line of investigation or it's a complete red herring. I remember there was a poster put together that had on it key vehicles, some of which were quite clearly involved. The white transit van, for example, that was on there. There was a white Ford cargo van and a red Ford cargo van. And that was because we had conflicting reports from different witnesses who said they'd seen a white one or a red one.
With more vehicles coming into the frame, it was clear this had been planned to precision. And a new discovery at the Midland Centre gave a possible insight into how the gang managed to ambush the security van.
The Midland Bank sits sandwiched between the railway line and the Regent Road. So what you'd got on the railway side of the perimeter wall were some ladders that were up against the wall from the railway line below. It's something that you're going to want to look at in relation to potential forensic recovery around the ladders themselves, in relation to fingerprints and any potential for footwear recoveries. And again, the origins of the ladders themselves became quite a significant line of inquiry. We believe that the robbers came off the railway line. We know that there were at least 2 climbing sets, and we believe that 3 robbers came over the wall from the railway line to run towards where Huckabee's van was.
If this theory was correct, Huckabee would have had a clear view of the gang approaching from the railway wall, potentially giving him time to react. Piecing the heist together bit by bit, police decided to bring certain people in for questioning once more.
Huckabee was interviewed a second time, about 3 weeks after the robbery, quite forcefully by a couple of detectives. And suspicion around Huckabee started to develop.
Graham Huckabee had only done that particular run 6 other times during his employment at the company and didn't often work with Louis Hedon.
When you're in that early stage of an investigation, you're trying to get a feel for who can you believe, who's credible. As a police officer, you get lied to for a living, so you tend to be able to spot the lie. And certainly the officers who spoke to Huckabee didn't believe his story, didn't believe what he'd done, didn't believe his actions the way they explained it.
We drove off, they threatened me, we drove, and then...
Graham Huckabee was an ex-police officer and had been a Securicor employee for 11 months.
The way Huckabee told the account wasn't credible. Various officers believed that. That's a very difficult thing to prove, but ultimately it's what a jury relies upon.
We arrived, parked up, Louis got out and went to the back of the van.
The robbers come to the van and they, according to Huckabee, shout, "We've got your partner," and communicate to Huckabee that they've got a hostage.
We've got your mate in the back here! I'm giving up this door now! And you and Daddy show us your name! Open this door now! I'm telling you!
Huckabee then activates the electronic switch, which allows the robbers into the van.
1, 2, 3!
Immediately adjacent to the driver's seat is the data track activation button. This is a small box, about 4 inches square, in the centre of which is a little red button, which you can pop. And there's also another one in full view on the dashboard in front of him. The one at the side of him would have been down by his right-hand side, between his seat and the door. And all he had to do was drop his hand and activate that button, which he didn't. He didn't do as he'd been trained. He didn't activate the data track button. Had that data track button been activated, Securicor would have been alerted straight away to the fact that one of their vans was either under attack or taken hostage. And that would have alerted the police, who would have been on the robbers within a very short space of time.
Me personally, unless if somebody come to my van and I'm sat in the driver's seat and said, "We've got your mate," I said, "Well, show him to me then."
He said the reason he hadn't acted as he should have done on the day of the robbery was that he was suffering from stress. The post-traumatic stress was based upon the previous robbery that Huckabee had been subjected to, one that took place at Salford precinct when I think one of the guards was stabbed.
This major breach of protocol threw Graham Huckabee right into the frame.
It was put to him that he was the inside man and he wouldn't have it.
Shay Power. Can you tell me about your association with him?
With doubt cast on a member of staff, detectives began trawling telephone records.
The first major breakthrough was in relation to the itemised billing. What we started to see were unusual patterns of calls. Calls that were made, calls that weren't made. And these were calls that were really being made in the run-up to the robbery, through March, April, May and June. Calls which appeared at first completely random. Calls which were taking place and then, for what appeared to be an isolation period, both before and after the robbery, didn't take place and then started up again. And these initially were calls and a connectivity between Graham Huckabee and a bloke called James Power. One of the first numbers that we saw significant was a number that was subscribed to Nina Power. Nina Power was the wife of James, also known as Shay Power. So the first piece of fact that we have is we have a phone number that we know Huckabee uses, ringing a phone number in the name of Nina Power. And that phone number from Nina Power ringing a phone that Huckabee uses.
Thanks.
Shay Power was a doorman from Prestwich, Manchester, with known criminal connections in his past.
Power was quite a heavy drinker. He drank in pubs in the Prestwich area and was virtually in there all the time. And that's what we knew that from surveillance. Huckabee featured occasionally, but Power was in the pubs all the time, from quite early during the day till quite late at night.
Detectives went to work monitoring Huckabee and his associates.
What we got was surveillance evidence of Huckabee and Power actually looking at buying a pub in Gloucesterport, Derbyshire area.
As police built a picture of the two associates, a further connection emerged.
It's from the Power phone and the Huckabee phone that we get the call, or we get the connectivity to the phone in the woman's name that we linked to Jimmy Hayes. That was linked to Jimmy Hayes because Mike Whiting had been on a previous investigation and knew that that was a Jimmy Hayes address. And Jimmy Hayes was a known robber, historically committed a number of offences and was well known to the police.
By now, the spotlight was on Hayes, Huckabee, and Power. If the phone numbers were used by those suspected, a clear link was appearing, and more was to come.
We had one call directly to or from the Hayes number to Huckabee. And through that number commenced a major line of inquiry.
Remember, if this goes pear-shaped, it's down to you.
One of the largest cash robberies in Europe has taken place in Salford, Greater Manchester, with over £6 million missing. Police are struggling to make a breakthrough. With no CCTV or DNA evidence to help them, they are searching for vital clues in the phone records of their three main suspects: Power, Huckabee, and now known robber, Hayes.
The fact that you've got at least one phone call from Huckabee going to a known armed robber, Huckabee being an alleged victim of an armed robbery, didn't ring right.
This was a major breakthrough for the police. If the numbers had been used by the two men, they now had a direct link between Huckabee, a Securicor employee, and Hayes, a convicted thief.
The breakthrough for the investigation was Mike's knowledge of Jimmy Hayes, who he was, what he was about, what he'd been into in the past.
But with no way of proving if it was actually Hayes and Huckabee who had made those calls, and without knowing the context of those conversations, officers had to keep digging for further evidence.
Then you start to stream out to a man called Tony Wilkes-Wells. Tony Wilkes-Wells, again, had convictions for armed robbery, including firearms offences. And then we had connectivity through a number that we linked to a London robber by the name of Charles Knight. Knight was a career criminal, a very professional robber, quite a character, had been a target of the flying squad on numerous occasions. Through Charles Knight, or Charlie Knight, we linked to Billy Goulden, a man who had a scrapyard in the East End of London.
Billy Goulden had no previous convictions for robbery, but officers were interested in phone records connecting him to Charlie Knight. A network of suspects was now forming from this phone activity, which connected other known criminals to Jimmy Hayes. But with only these records to go on, was it enough to establish their involvement in the crime?
Jimmy Hayes, Scotch Jimmy, as he's also known, had lived in Manchester for quite a long time. He'd been sentenced to a number of terms of imprisonment, including for robbery, hardened criminal, and a close associate of Charlie Knight.
Sir, before you go, I think you should take a look at this.
With this possible link between Manchester and London associates, officers believed the business card in the abandoned van could give a further clue.
See what they can come up with. And let's do a trace on this Derek Wilson chap.
What we'd got in the van, which was significant, was a business card with Derek Wilson's mobile number. He was a small-time mechanic from the East End. We were devoid of any fingerprints, any DNA, any forensic evidence, but we got his business card, which had his mobile number on. I think the subscriber was nothing to do with him, but that's the link that gave us that phone number and put that phone in Derek Wilson's hand. There were calls from Huckabee to Power to Hayes, Wilkes-Wells Hayes, to Knight, to Goulden and Wilson. And it was almost like something had happened that had caused this ripple effect.
On paper, these phone connections looked damning to police, but they couldn't be certain it was these suspects actually using the numbers. So they continued digging, and detectives made a further connection between Wilson and the abandoned van.
Derek Wilson was the man who had serviced the white Ford Transit van that was used in the robbery and that was dumped.
Servicing a van used in a robbery drew attention to Wilson, but this didn't confirm any direct link with the heist. For the detectives, a strong pattern was nevertheless emerging between certain suspects in the south and those with connections to Securicor in Manchester, but further concrete evidence was needed.
What was developed then was a complex operation involving an undercover officer.
Greater Manchester Police took the dramatic decision to deploy a covert officer to pubs in and around Manchester that Power and Huckabee drank in.
Look where you left the wine.
The task of the undercover police officer was to become part of the circle in which Huckabee and Power frequented, and in particular Power.
Now, for the first time, we can hear actual recordings from the Greater Manchester Police undercover operation.
What was it doing? I worked on the road at Securicor, Manchester.
The officer at times wore a listening device.
I was in the cylinder. There's two on the van, yeah. He was driving along in the van. I do both now. So.
They're just in a pub and Power says, step into my office, sits down at a pub table, and the undercover officer sits with him and they start to talk about things. Then he starts to talk about his connections, about who he knows, without being specific, without going into detail. And he starts to talk about how professional the gang is that he's linked to.
What they do, they let you out. All right. What dangerous men, these.
The undercover officer had to maintain a pretense and work for the security company each day before going to the pub to talk about his job.
The undercover officer said he'd been working at Securicor for some time, starts to display dissatisfaction, shall we say, with his employers.
Experience and stuff, but they're just taking anyone now. They've gone from 3 to 2 as it is, you know what I mean?
He's not happy with his role, he's not happy with his lot, he starts to talk about money problems and then lays out the bait. That he's driving these vans around that are full of so much money, would be so easy to take had they had an inside man.
I do 40, 50 hours a week and I come out with peanuts at the end of the week thinking...
One of the areas you've got to be careful about with undercover wars is that what you don't do is you don't step into what the Americans call entrapment. In the UK we call it agent provocateur, and it was fully explored and examined and it was agreed that he hadn't. He merely laid the bait out.
Hi Jimmy, it's Shay. Listen, you're free to talk.
Just keep yours in there, like, but those two numbers, whatever, obviously that's questions that, every 3 hours off the police, I mean, that, the other ones who were, like, you know, who were, like, 2 months or something on the trip, like, you can't do that, so you live with that yesterday, so forget it, to win them that time. You're not hurt anybody. You're all hurt, no, don't hurt anybody. Don't never do it. You know, what they hurt is a massive,
Altogether, the undercover officer was enrolled for about 12 months, nearly a year, which is quite a substantial deployment, quite a substantial effort to maintain that facade. I think what happened was those further up the chain from Shay thought, this is too good to be true. We're not going to get 2 golden geese at the same nest, and they pulled the plug, and that's what the undercover officer was told by Shay.
We'll have a think about it.
They're not happy, and he walked away.
Despite the trail turning cold, detectives were convinced there was a connection between all of their suspects. But they still did not have the concrete evidence they needed to place their suspects at the scene of the crime. More than a year after the raid and thousands of man-hours later, officers decided to watch and wait.
We started to take an interest in it again in around 1998.
3 years on from the robbery, detectives received new, reliable intelligence about the internal makeup of the gang, which they were able to confirm through an independent source. Despite no additional evidence from the crime scene, this intelligence confirmed their original suspicions.
We gathered a substantial picture of events both leading up to the robbery and after the robbery. And we were able to put together a package that led us to believe that we should bring these people in.
Off the back of this, Alan Donahue and his team quickly hauled the suspects in for questioning.
When we effected those arrests, it was quite a memorable moment, really. We'd had this investigation in Manchester for over 4 years, and had gone through enormous difficulties with it. Almost absence of any forensic evidence from the scene. We arrested not only a number of men who we suspected to be part of the team, but we also brought in their spouses, girlfriends. We didn't know what they knew. We believed that had a spouse of theirs been involved in such an offence, the spouse must have known something about it and could potentially be party to the overall conspiracy.
And this move brought a turning point to the whole investigation.
Claire Healy, as she was called then, was Huckabee's girlfriend at the time of the robbery. Claire Healy was to give us significant information which ultimately came to be used as evidence against Huckabee. Some key aspects of that were the fact that she told us that Huckabee had told her that he'd been involved in the robbery.
After one of the country's biggest heists from a cash-in-transit van in Salford, a major revelation has rocked the case. Officers have decided to pull in family and friends of the key suspects with surprising results. Huckabee's girlfriend has alarming new evidence to share.
She told us that Huckabee had had a sweetener. She also told us about some aspects of his finances, and we also spoke to his ex-wife, again, who declared to us that he was spending more than he had. Not massive amounts, but if you've got nothing, you don't spend money, and Huckabee was spending.
Officers found evidence of deposits in Huckabee's bank account, but these were justified as a friend paying off an outstanding debt. He was also believed to have lavished his daughter with gifts, which he denied.
We also brought in Nina Power, Shay's wife, and the nugget that we got from her interview and from Shay Power's interview was we're actually able to put the phone in Shay Power's hand, and he admitted that he was making the phone calls to Graham Huckabee.
Associating with Mr. Huckabee. I'm not saying I didn't ring him, I rang him, okay, I rang him.
Shay Power passed off the calls between Huckabee and him as being innocent, but the other allegations rocked the investigation.
I don't know where you're getting this.
However, the rest of the key suspects denied any involvement in the robbery.
Maybe you'd like to explain how it got...
Most of the others were just no comment.
Was Mr. Tony Wells known to you?
They were experienced and knew not to say anything.
What about Shay Power? Mr. Graham Huckabee? Mr. Billy Goulden? No.
Don't know who you mean.
Mr. Knight, if you wouldn't mind.
Huckabee, when re-interviewed in 1999, made no comment on legal advice.
Graham, you're not doing yourself any favours by not speaking to us.
Shay was quite open on interview and talked quite extensively about who he was talking to.
I could say he was just drinking buddy, that's all. How's the jag?
He knew these people, they were part of the Manchester network. Shay had been a doorman in the city, he knew lots of people.
By now, 5 years had passed since the heist, but Greater Manchester Police believed the case was solid. Huckabee's girlfriend had provided crucial new evidence. Phone records potentially linked each gang member. Undercover audio threw the spotlight on Power, and fresh, reliable intelligence from an independent source confirmed their original suspicions. With this, the investigation team decided to make their move, and the case went to a hearing.
The whole thing was on a massive scale. And it was almost, before it could even start, there was another drama, which was that the defence for two of the defendants, Charlie Knight and Anthony Wilkes-Wells, argued that evidence that was going to be used against them was inadmissible because it proved nothing, namely phone traffic between them and others before, around the time of the robbery and after the robbery.
The telephone records produced by the prosecution are inadmissible.
This was a blow for the prosecution team, and a difficult decision had to be made.
In light of the decision about sufficiency on those two, we, the prosecution, abandoned the case against Jimmy Hayes.
Court adjourned.
Officers had built a similar case against Hayes, that he was using the phone number being investigated, but this was difficult to prove.
So when we actually went to trial, we went to trial on Billy Goulden and Derek Wilson, who were the London end, and on Graham Huckabee and Shay Power at the Manchester end.
With the case against 3 suspects dropped, officers faced another challenge with Huckabee's girlfriend.
She wouldn't make a witness statement, so what we had to do with Claire was we witness summonsed her to the committal, and she gave evidence. What happens then, because she's not made a witness statement, it's called a deposition, because it's taken in front of a magistrate and it's signed and it's accepted and treated then on as a witness statement.
Eventually, the trial drew to a dramatic conclusion.
Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, have you reached your verdict?
The jury were out for quite some considerable time and eventually returned not guilty verdicts on Billy Goulden and Derek Wilson.
The scrap metal dealer and car mechanic were found to have no links to the robbery and were exonerated.
As far as Huckabee and Power were concerned, they couldn't reach a decision. It was what they call a hung jury.
In relation to the case against Huckabee and Power, I'm ordering a retrial.
So the judge ordered a retrial. And we came to the retrial some 5 or 6 months later.
The next trial went ahead eventually and ended in quite dramatic fashion because although there were only 2 defendants, the case was both complex and difficult, and despite that, the jury returned a verdict in a very short period of time.
Heart was in my mouth. And then you hear the indictment read, how do you find the defendant? And the names were read. Guilty. And you hear the guilty come out, and it like rings across the court. And when they delivered the guilty against Huckabee, he quite dramatically fell to his knees.
What have you done to me? He's innocent!
And it was just street theatre.
Officers, take them down.
Power didn't react. And then the judge came in with the sentences, and he gave them 14 years each. Quite a reasonable sentence.
For Greater Manchester Police, the case had come to a head. Huckabee, the driver, and Power, who they considered to be the handler, had been found guilty. The other suspects walked free. But the story didn't end there.
After the convictions, there was an immediate and very public backlash from Mr. Huckabee's family, who announced that they would campaign to free him.
Huckabee's family and girlfriend Lucy Roper became a formidable force in trying to prove his innocence, drumming up huge media attention and picking through reams of notes on the investigation.
The campaign started immediately after the conviction and continued for about 2.5 years. It got quite an amount of high-profile publicity. Myself, at the Manchester Evening News, I covered several stories. There was one demonstration outside Greater Manchester Police Headquarters. On another occasion, Mr. Huckabee's girlfriend campaigned on his behalf to a committee meeting at Westminster.
The campaign gathered huge momentum, and just over 2 years into Huckabee and Power's sentences, an appeal was granted.
The grounds of appeal were, one, that Huckabee's defence counsel didn't think the conviction was safe. That's not a ground for appeal, but was nevertheless included. And the second one, they appealed to the Court of Appeal about the admissibility of billing in relation to Jimmy Hayes.
And in another twist, Huckabee's defence focused on one major element to appeal on.
As part of his defence, Huckabee put forward some medical evidence in relation to post-traumatic stress disorder. This medical evidence was based upon an examination undertaken by doctors some 7 years after the event. What he sought to do was say that the reason he hadn't acted as he should have done on the day of the robbery was that he was suffering from stress.
Stephen Regal is the psychotherapist who assessed Graham Huckabee whilst in prison.
My prior knowledge of Graham was primarily what Lucy had told me, was that she felt that he was suffering from post-traumatic stress prior to the robbery that he was in prison for. And she briefly described the episode where he had witnessed a colleague being stabbed. She felt that this was a significant contribution to his behaviour and that there'd been no formal assessment of his psychological or psychiatric condition. I felt that he was suffering not just from post-traumatic stress disorder, but he had what we would describe as a comorbid depressive illness. When we say comorbid, what that means is that there's another psychiatric condition occurring around the same time. He was clearly very depressed. And he was obviously clearly depressed prior to his imprisonment because he was clearly suffering from post-traumatic stress at that time as well.
These findings were to have an incredible effect on the case.
Oh, yeah? Graham's family have been campaigning for this day. It's finally come. Graham Huckabee is a free man.
It feels unbelievable, I can tell you, absolutely unbelievable. We're just going to have a nice family Christmas now.
On the day that he was actually let out of prison, I travelled down to Staffordshire and was waiting outside when he came through that door and got the first picture. He was embraced by his mum, his sister.
Cheers! Cheers! Freedom! Freedom!
7 years after the robbery, Huckabee and Power walked free from prison after serving 2 years and 7 months of their sentence. Shay Power passed away 12 months later. As for the missing millions,
I think there was a £50,000 reward for the cheques. They were never recovered. And there was a reward for the cash. We never actually got any of the cash back. This robbery had quite clearly been subject to detailed planning. They'd clearly researched the topic, they'd clearly prepared the ground, and they executed it almost perfectly.